Welcome to Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group. And we have a special edition of Ask the Expert talking about top VMS trends as we head into the new year. And we've seen just such a change in the technology space when it comes to the contingent workforce. And there's a lot of new trends coming into play as the industry evolves, and we're seeing the space evolve in terms of the different types of companies that are getting involved. There's been a lot of new entrants, new technology players, and we're talking to one of the best today. So I've got John Clark from Connexus VMS here to talk about the top trends in the VMS space. So John, thanks for coming on the show today and talking about the various trends that you're starting to see and have been seeing as we go into 2025.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. Good to see you as always. Yeah, it's been an interesting couple of years, right, in our space. I think a lot of people have taken sort of some pause and some food for thought, and that's allowed for some really nice innovation in the entire contingent workforce ecosystem. So yeah, super excited. I think 2025 is going to be a huge year for everyone. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, you got it. Well, and with the cycles we've gone through, there's actually been an evolution of how things get managed and who is managing programs. And so there's this convergence of new technology players coming in, some of the existing players, i.e., and we'll talk about the trends in staffing that are starting to see, the need to put together programs within their existing client base. Things are really changing, and so it's exciting to start to talk about some of the trends and take all of the moving parts and kind of focus it for the audience. So one of the things that I know we've talked about in the past and I've seen out there is the high volume light industrial side of the industry. And in the past, it was always very manual. It was difficult because it was shift work and it wasn't these nice, easy, long-term engagements. There's a lot of scheduling involved. Billing is usually a lot more unique. Like now with the more modern technology, you're seeing more and more implementations of light industrial, the high volume side of the business going more digital. Can you talk about that trend?
This has been a huge one for the last few years, and Jeff, right? Like companies have always struggled with this, right? And historically, the service providers did not focus on this area because typically it's like a 5-to-1 ratio, right, of your resources from light industrial to professional, for example. So you need 5 resources to get you to the same spend, but it's typically 10 times more complicated. Tons of turnover, short notice shifts. So it's been an area that has been relatively neglected from a service provider perspective, in my space anyway, in the VMS world or technology space. So what I've seen personally is a lot of clients are really have been crying out for a solution in this arena. And the service providers, quite frankly, have exhausted their footprint in the kind of Fortune 500 professional services type arena to a certain extent. Definitely in a mature market like North America or the US. And now those companies or service providers, they want to expand their offering, and to do that, there's way more options from a software perspective to make that happen. And you see that with companies like Beeline acquiring functionality that can tackle some of this high volume light industrial. So I use light industrial as the easy example. People in warehouses moving boxes as the most obvious one, but really that transcends other high volume industries, and even areas like healthcare that do require maybe some short notice shifts. They do require this shift in the scheduling functionality that typically has been lacking historically. So it's definitely expanding just beyond that light industrial realm, and across the board of sort of shift work in high volume. So that's been a massive trend that I've seen, and the functionality from a vendor management system perspective is changing rapidly. And that includes integrations and how you utilize the system across the board. Things like clock in, clock out systems, for example.
It's somewhat like the Uberization on the scheduling front, where you're able to, schedule shifts ahead of time and get what used to be very much a manual process to schedule people in. you're now being able to know what positions are filled, what you haven't filled, so that the service providers and the staffing providers can then really hustle to fill some of those extra spots that you need filled for to manage the shift for that day. And technology is driving that. And then on the back end, you're also looking to digitize what was a manual process on the billing, the timekeeping and the billing, and either do it through digital on an app or integrations, like you said, with the clock in, clock out systems that also manage security and things like that at facilities. So it's
Yeah.
interesting that, you know, it was always so complex that it was kind of left off. And like you said, the profitability of that from a
Yeah.
service provider was more difficult, so it may have gotten neglected. And what often happened is be outsourced to almost like a master staffing vendor that would take it all over and put bodies on problems. Now you're able to put technology on the problems and reduce the
Yep.
cost of administering that and making it more efficient, right?
Yeah. Like ironically, high volume light industrial is more painful for the client to manage without some type of technology or automation, right? So it's ironic that that's kind of at the back end of this industry's evolution because it was the most pain up front. There's a few reasons for that. For example, companies have been dealing with high volume for years and they basically have meshed together these like manual processes and it's so complicated that they can't change, right? And it's like, don't fix this because it's I'm not bleeding that hard. But now the solutions are catching up and it's providing that automation, the visibility, the real time analytics. Like we have some clients that do like Amazon final mile delivery. And our API pushes to their system, and every day they can check the resources. Like all of that is fairly new, right, from a functional perspective or functionality perspective. So the tools are definitely catching up, and it's been driven by the appetite for the service providers to be more aggressive in acquiring clients in that space. So huge across the board, and even outside of North America, like we're seeing huge uptick in light industrial VMS use in places like the UK or mainland Europe.
So the other side I've seen in trends is the enterprise, and the enterprise has been serviced, right? You mentioned it earlier on. The large enterprise clients that had that kind of traditional 9 to 5 professional workforce, and even, you know, heavy industrial workforce that are longer term, they are being serviced, and the SIA's penetration rates of VMS are very high in the 80s, 80 plus range. And so, you know, where are we turning to? And it looks like the mid market is starting to adopt more and more contingent workforce, just have to deal with the ups and down cycles and as they grow. And with that, they're starting to say, how do we implement something that is easier to implement, not as much of a 6 month implementation cycle, which is more the enterprise type model with lots of integration. I need something out of the box that beats the spreadsheet that I'm currently dealing with because it's just not sufficient enough to manage the end-to-end process because I'm now at a kind of a larger volume than I can manage it myself, but still not such an enterprise volume that I need a big enterprise type system.
You're absolutely right. It also comes back to the appetite of larger providers in this space to take on that type of business. And, you know, it's just part of natural growth, right? Like you have a huge footprint in the enterprise market, but really, do you want to expand beyond that to grow your business? The other part is there's geographies like the UK. Obviously, I know that market well, just being from Scotland, but the UK is very much a mid-market
Yeah.
industry, right? Like almost everything is mid-market, right? So those markets are much more mature. And so we're definitely seeing like those large enterprise type providers on both the software and the service provider space and having the appetite to take business that they probably would not have taken before. It's like, you know, Tesla releasing all their patents to everyone else just to improve market adoption, right? Like if the service providers have the appetite, then you can roll out those solutions in a much more broad space. So yeah, we're seeing a huge uptick in that area. You are right in terms of the complexity, and part of it is there's just way more options for clients from a VMS perspective. Gone are the days where if you had 25 million in spend, you make 4 calls and get rejected 3 times, right? Because clients are or service providers wouldn't take your business if it was below, 30 million or something in terms of spend threshold. The newer sort of agile VMS providers aren't as complex from a technology perspective. They aren't as complex from a development perspective. How the code is written is much more modern. So you can monetize or make that mid-market client profitable, whereas historically that was more difficult to do. Mid-market companies, or mid-market spend companies, I should say, a lot of them often thought that they were too small. And part of that is because the market feedback they were getting told them so. But now they're realizing that if you have 5, 10, 15, 25 million in spend, like you should still have a VMS, right? There's no excuse for spreadsheets across the board anymore in any part of your business. So yeah, and that's another area that we're seeing like complete explosion. And you'll see, some of the conference providers, SIA and ProcureCon, etc., really having content specifically around mid-market. VMSA, for example, they have a whole mid-market focus that you can absorb content that really is aimed at the mid-market and not just aimed at those super enterprise.
Well, and it's interesting, like the complexity and what they're looking for is just different, right? And
Yeah,
the flexibility of the more modern software and the number of providers that are in the space have allowed for options within that. And rightly so, because even at 10, 20, 30 million in spend or even less, there is an ROI for implementing software that makes it more efficient, allows you visibility into what are still the same drivers at an enterprise level. They're the same drivers at a mid-market level where risk is important to mitigate because it only takes one situation where you have a liability around worker misclassification, health and safety issues, etc., where there's a huge liability for you. And then the other side is cost savings. And so the cost savings ROI, even on the smaller spend levels, so that you know you're getting value for what you're spending, either on SOW or for contractors and for consultants you're bringing in, as you move towards that more flexible workforce as your resourcing mix, is there's still a lot of ROI by managing it more efficiently.
And I think the key is the I. Like the investment doesn't have to be 12 months, an internal project team, because it's super complicated. So the investment from a mid-market perspective, and don't get me wrong, I've seen mid-market deals that are 30 million that are more complex than $200 million deals. We all have, right? But for the most part, it is, you don't need as much of that upfront work because you're not as big or as complicated. Therefore, you can justify taking the plunge.
And I also think that mid-market, a trend that you've been seeing, and we've talked about kind of some of your go-to-markets around who you're working with in the mid-market, is staffing agencies that were providing resources to the mid-market players, are also embracing developing pseudo MSP programs so that they are helping their clients manage all of their contingent workers across all of their suppliers, not just the ones that they're focused on providing to you. So they're, escalating into more of an MSP type program where they are also suggesting, hey, let's bring in some technology to make this more efficient for you. So, I think the mid-market is opening up as more and more of the staffing agencies that would have resisted MSP, VMS type solutions because they thought it was, hurting their margins or getting in between their client, they're seeing it as either a competitive advantage or a way they can service their clients better. And they're embracing technology to help making their job easier and more efficient as they help their clients in the mid-market.
That's the number one biggest change I've seen in the last 2 years. And like I can speak to my own business, like 50% of the deals we've closed in the last 12 months have been staffing companies that are either trying to start an MSP or are bringing a VMS to more of like a prime or master vendor type environment. There's a whole other ask the expert on this one, Jeff, but really like staffing agencies, if you're not bringing digital automation to your clients, like eventually they're going to find a VMS on their own or hire an MSP, and then you are definitely different from an engagement perspective if you're a staffing provider. They want the automation, the process consolidation, the visibility, reporting, analytics, so on and so forth. So staffing vendors that are really embracing this are crushing it. And the tools are much easier to white label, for example. You can make it look like your own. And quite frankly, if you're a prime vendor or master vendor, like every single one of those are used in sub vendors. The use of sub vendors is just super common in this North American market. So it does help from a vendor management perspective because you're kind of managing vendors anyway. But if you don't bring a VMS with you, like again, someone else may do that, and it also makes you much more sticky. You're seen as much more of a strategic partner when you have that level of technology and automation. So yeah, it's kind of twofold: is staffing agencies trying to start some type of vendor management or MSP type offering, or staffing agencies that have that kind of master prime vendor type relationship, or even a large chunk of exclusive business just in one sector of a business. To add a VMS into their offering has been like really popular in the last 12 months in particular.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, technology is enabling these staffing firms to become MSPs to a certain respect because you're automating a lot of that, what would have been manual processes in the past, and you're really shifting towards, and I've heard the term thrown out in the future of work conversations and where our industry is going is the digitization of the MSP. And so
Yep.
as we go forward, and you can't have a conversation around technology that doesn't talk about AI, but I think
Yeah.
as AI comes into the technology space, especially in the VMS space, you're automating a lot of the tasks, be it fixing and qualifying recs, fixing job descriptions, to match ranking candidates. Those were tasks that were manual in and done by a person in the past with an automated workflow. Now the with AI being brought into the technology, those tasks are starting to be automated. So it's making it easier and easier for anyone to become an MSP because the digitalization of the MSP is happening within the technology. Some of the tasks that needed to be supported in programs that used to be people doing it, the technology with AI can start to make some of those decisions and automate those processes.
Yeah, absolutely. We had this exact conversation last year, Jeff, on the 2024 trends, and you were like, "What about AI?" And I was like, "Nah," because it's just like it is a buzzword, right? And people are repackaging old ideas as AI. But at the time, there was like very few use cases, right? So for me, I'm like, okay, the noise is great and the positivity is awesome and the innovation is where we're all striving towards. But what does it actually do day to day? Like, what are the examples where it actually has worked?
Yeah.
And those examples are really starting to appear now, which is awesome. So it is absolutely kicking into overdrive. Part of that is the automation of those manual tasks that you mentioned, right? And again, you have some like gimmicky AI stuff, right? Like you can match your color scheme or whatever, right? But things like resume ranking through AI that learns over and over again and can even learn by the manager, etc. Like those are real life use cases that actually work and are adding tons of value. And that helps an MSP. The AI conversation is a bigger one that we can continue, but from an MSP perspective, it's like you may not need 40 people like manually screening resumes, right? Or doing intake calls with a manager. And then you can take those resources and maybe you don't need as many of them, but focus on the strategic value, right? And implementing a direct sourcing program, adding SOW, expanding geographically, right? Focusing your time on bigger and higher value tasks that really drive the strategic value to the clients. I think one thing that the MSPs have struggled with is like when your program is in level 3, 4, 5 of maturity, how do you keep adding value to your clients so that they don't eventually bring this program in-house, right? And some clients never will because it's too painful, but that's a real risk for MSPs. And I think focusing on that strategic value, being the experts, and bringing expertise to the table is just a much better and higher usage of their time and adds more value to the client. And if they can get rid of the noise or at least reduce it through automation, that's going to be a huge trend. And the MSPs are continuing to evolve across the board. So from my perspective, we've seen some of those automation components really start to take off. And the MSP market is becoming much more competitive, like a bunch of staffing companies. And by the way, some real big staffing companies that don't have an MSP. So they have the resources and the client base to make an impact in this space. So it is becoming much more competitive across the board, which means that you have to be more innovative, right? That will typically drive innovation. Competition drives innovation, typically can drive price as well. So that's TBD. But like I'm seeing a lot more MSPs even expand their service offering, right?
Yeah.
So like larger MSPs, for example, that maybe historically have focused on a certain spend threshold, well, they're saying, well, we'll take smaller spend, if we can provide EOR services or direct sourcing or curation type services. So we're seeing like, that kind of general expansion of the services that they provided and the clients they previously would have looked at. And they have to add more services to make it more profitable, but that does typically drive some innovation as well. So I'm seeing a lot more from a service offering perspective, especially with the big guys. Again, even the MSPs targeting much more mid-market type business that they previously would not have, like that's a huge trend. And even like expanding globally. So maybe taking a smaller client in North America, but that has a potential to not be mid-market downstream. A lot of companies have the appetite to do that, and previously they did not. And then there's other expansion areas like kind of immature industries like healthcare from an MSP perspective and a VMS perspective. I think COVID was really the main catalyst in improving the service offering from an MSP perspective in areas like healthcare because cost savings, the pricing got out of control and the volume got out of control.
And there's always this debate of internally managed versus externally managed program, but the automation of tasks that an MSP used to do in helping organizations manage their programs, if done well, and the automation helping doing some of those tasks, more and more programs are starting to say, hey, can we bring this in-house because we don't need 40 people. So I'll outsource that to an MSP and they'll just kind of put their fee structure into a markup and then that's how we'll pay for it. Now with automation and the VMSs getting better at doing some of the heavy lifting like match ranking, qualification of recs, and better job descriptions, better reporting on the back end, invoice, reconciliation, all of these types of things that were very labor intensive and manual. If the technology is getting stronger in doing those tasks, you don't need that. And the manual people doing them and putting bodies against those problems so you can do it more internally. So have you seen that as a trend too, that where they're reviewing technology and bringing programs in-house because some of the technologies get better at helping them manage it themselves?
Yeah, I think generally that trend has existed for multiple years now, right? Like, and again, the more mature programs, it's kind of like they exhaust their value of an MSP. Where an MSP really adds significant value is at the start because you drive a ton of cost savings, you have access to the expertise from a process perspective, how do your clients in other areas do this, the implementation, like all of that is a real heavy lift. But I think, the more mature programs, there's definitely been a trend of companies looking to bring that in-house. And I think that has driven some innovation in that MSP environment, which is great. So like, again, things like adding to their service offerings or looking at clients that maybe would be historically too small or expanding geographically. Like it's hard to expand a program to Europe. And people say Europe has 20 million in spend, but spread over 5 countries with 5 different languages, right? Like it's not easy to execute. So yeah, I personally have not seen the direct customer embracing technology so much in a Gen 1 program. Like, I think that is a push. Where you see it is in that kind of Gen 2, 3 program where they feel like they may have exhausted value from their MSP and to look at some of those automations. I haven't seen it being adopted en masse, but that I have the general feeling that is coming. And I think the VMSs will become supercharged and become that sort of middleware source of truth, central record, where other softwares can plug in and supercharge the VMS offering and let the MSPs be super strategic, and that combined provides like a super well-rounded offering.
That was going to be one of my next points is the VMS, the trend towards the VMS being the system of record and having a lot of functionality in different areas, but being the system of record and then bringing in best of breed products and point solutions for modules like SOW or compliance or onboarding or different things like that, where the VMS is the ERP or the system of record for the contingent workforce. And although it may have certain functionality, having the ability to turn off pieces of that and integrate in best of breed point solutions in different areas, be it direct sourcing, SOW, etc., I think
Yeah.
is where we're seeing a trend. So more modern technology that has open APIs and things like that that allow for other systems to connect in is also a trend I've been seeing.
Like you focus on what you do really well, can't be everything to everyone. And because of the rapid rate of technological advancement, like the direct sourcing modules, quite frankly, direct sourcing is a very simple concept, right? Like you're hiring contractors on your own. But they've wrapped it in this beautiful technology that makes it easy and seamless for clients, that are much better than what a VMS could build, right? So what we're seeing in the VMS environment is more VMSs having like an open API, for example. So you can plug in, like I could go out and try and build an independent compliance tool, independent contractor compliance tool, an SOW module, a direct sourcing module, a resume ranking. Like I'm never going to do all that. It's like the speed to market is more important. So we create an environment, and there's multiple VMSs that do this, where you can plug those systems in really seamlessly, and it's one experience for the customer, but you still have that centralization or that system of record, which is beautiful from a reporting, analytics, data, performance perspective. And even like super tactical offerings like background checks are being like incredibly digitally automated. That historically was phone calls and emails, right?
Well, I think we could probably continue to talk about trends and exciting things happening in the VMS space and the contingent workforce space broader, but wanted to get this in under a certain period of time. And
Yeah.
John, our conversations are always exciting and lots of fun. And I appreciate you coming on and talking about the VMS trends for 2025.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I really appreciate you having me. And listen, we don't have enough gigabyte storage to record our offline conversations because we go deep and wide in this stuff. But no, I appreciate you having me. Thanks for everything.